Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, rate it, review it with a big fat 5-star review, and share it with everyone you know. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates to find out about upcoming guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Be sure to check out their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y, Memorial Drive, or at metrojeep.com and make it Metro. And then drive home in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
Once upon a time, record stores were the most important things in the world. At least they were to me. If my parents went shopping for stuff at the local mall, I went to the record store. If I had stayed with my parents, I would have been bored to tears after about 5 minutes. But in a record store, I could spend hours sifting through stacks of records that I couldn't possibly afford, listening to whatever the guy at the register was playing for hours. The record store was a magical place where time stood still, a place where discoveries were made, where judgments were cast, and where a young kid could transform into the coolest guy in the neighborhood simply by owning a great record collection. Over the years, record stores have come and gone, and many of them are still around. Others, on the other hand, would change music forever, not because they sold the most or became the biggest, but because they had the wherewithal and foresight to do things differently. In 1973, for example, Rhino Records opened for business in Los Angeles. Initially, Rhino was a humble record store founded by Richard Foos, who began operation in a small rented corner near the UCLA campus. Eventually, he outgrew that space and officially opened the Rhino Record Shop. During this time, Richard would hire high school friend and fellow bandmate Harold Bronson, who would eventually become the store manager. Within just 2 years of opening, both Foos and Bronson decided to expand the operation and begin distributing their own releases, first in the store and eventually through a mail-order catalog. At first, they began releasing novelty records, including their first record in 1975, Go to Rhino Records by Wildman Fisher. By 1978, Rhino Records had been transformed into a full-time distribution company. Over the years, Rhino would become one of the most respected record labels in the country, primarily based upon reissuing previously released material, obtaining licenses from other record companies, remastering original tapes, and packaging these releases with previously unreleased material. Record buyers and collectors were beside themselves, finally being given access to music that had never been available from such artists as the Turtles, the Monkees, the Beach Boys, the Grateful Dead, the Ramones, the Bee Gees, Love, the Cars. The list goes on and on forever. Prior to all of this, Richard Foos and Harold Bronson were involved in a band in high school called David and His Winos. Beginning in 1969, the band would include future music industry heavyweights such as future Columbia Records executive Paul Rappaport and Mark Levitin, who would go on to join the Warner Music Group. Between 1970 and 1975, the band recorded 3 singles, which were financed, pressed, and distributed by Harold Bronson himself. And while the band got some national attention from critic Lester Bangs in Cream magazine, much of their music went unreleased and has been out of print for the last 50 years. Since then, those 3 singles have become valuable items for record collectors. In March, Liberation Hall Records, along with the help of Harold Bronson, has released the definitive collection of songs from David and His Winos called Savage Young Whinos. 19 songs, some of which have never been released in any form. A collection of proto-punk songs that showcase both a rawness and sense of humor that would be the hallmark of Rhino Records for years to come. Harold Bronson has spent time as a music journalist, having written for the Daily Bruin at UCLA and also at Rolling Stone magazine and several other publications. Over the last several years, Harold Bronson has published several books, including those that document his years at Rhino, including 23's Time Has Come Today, Rock and Roll Diaries 1967 through 2007. The man has had an absolutely amazing career. To talk about all of that is my guest today, former Rhino Records executive, author, and member of David and the Winos, Harold Bronson, on Baxie's Musical Podcast. One of the challenging parts of preparing for an interview with Harold Bronson is trying to figure out where you want to start and then trying to figure out, are there enough hours in the day to get to everything that I want to get to? And unfortunately,
Yes.
I don't have enough hours in the day, and I'm not sure you do either. But I mean, I look at your career and I'm dumbfounded by how much you've done and how much you've been a part of. It really is very extraordinary. And well, let's start with the album. It's coming out on March 6th. Savage Young Whinos, Morgan David and his Winos. Tell me about the beginnings of all of this.
Yes. So it was like a high school band. We just kind of got together and played for fun as far as I wonder what it would sound like playing this song or playing that song. But that uh, evolved into when I was at UCLA, I wrote for the Daily Bruin, the campus newspaper, and the music, the entertainment section. And there were music fans like me who, were musical, could play instruments. So um, at a certain point during Christmas break, I got together, okay, let's record a couple songs if they turn out well, to make a record. So notable, the guitar player on that first record is Jonathan Kellerman, who is a New York Times best-selling author of murder mysteries. Um, but the first song was always, Mad Magazine was really important growing up for myself and, for more than my generation. And there was a flexi disc in one of the issues to promote the album that was coming out. But the song was Nose Job. It was done in a doo-wop style. And obviously, this being a number of years later. So I wanted to record it, but I did it really deadpan, meaning like the lyrics are so ridiculous and so funny. I was thinking Mick Jagger. No,
No, I remember a couple of the others, like "It's a Gas" was another one that came out.
yes,
But Nose Job
yes.
certainly certainly stood out. That's for sure.
Now she's the prettiest gal in town, nose job. Anyway, so we did that. And the problem is on my tape recorder, I got the instrumentals on the two songs. It turned out really well, but my syncing mechanism was a bit off. Number of months later, with three of my high school friends who were also at UCLA, we were across in this apartment. We were across the hall from George Carlin, and he was in the transition from short-haired comedian to growing his hair long, and talking about hipper things like marijuana and stuff. And we established a friendship, and I borrowed his tape recorder because his syncing mechanism, worked, and I recorded the vocals in our tiled bathroom. And so a number of months later, I pressed that our first single. So that and a subsequent single, and then that rolled into putting out an album. And the album came out in August 1973. So an enhanced, improved version of that album is coming out March 6th. So that's Savage Young Whinos by Mogan David and His Winos. And I really liked the colorful names of rock groups in the 60s, like Jefferson Airplane or Strawberry Alarm Clock. So that accounts for kind of the name. But so this was a few years before the DIY trend later on in the 70s. So it really wasn't kind of that well known that you could go to a pressing plant and give them cash, like a more established label. So when I was working at the Rhino store and then became manager of the store, I went to the owner, Richard Foose, and I said, look, let's start a label from the back room of the store because I know how to do this because I'd put out two singles in this album. And so we put out a few singles over the next 2 or 3 years. And then in 1978, we put out our first album. So that represented a more serious commitment. And then we went into partners at the label, 50-50 to try to, establish our label. That was the start of it. Oh, by the way, I should say one of the reasons why the Savage Young Winos album got a lot of attention at the time is I was inspired by the Who's Live at Leeds and the inserts that they put in, kind of the history of the band. So I thought, oh, let's do that as well. But in some cases, I made fun of ourselves. For instance, Paul Rappaport, who succeeded Kellerman as lead guitar player, I had his failed music test at UCLA. So that was among the items that were, the inserts at the time.
When you go back and listen to it now, and obviously with the re-release of this coming out in March, when you go back and listen to it, what's your thought about that? I mean, this stuff has been largely out of print for the last 50 years or so. But when you go back,
Yes.
what how do you feel about that music now?
No, I like it. I think it's really good. But the caveat is, these were low budget recordings we were always conscious of how much time we had. And it wasn't like we did rehearse, but we weren't well seasoned, polished musicians. But let me provide a context. We love the music of the 60s. We grew up with the music of the 60s. When we played live, most of our repertoire were songs we liked that we could play from the 60s. So Glad All Over by the Dave Clark Five, Just Like Me by Paul Revere and the Raiders, Train Kept a Rollin' by the Yardbirds. And when we recorded new songs, most of which I wrote with Mark Levitin, it was in the spirit of 2.5, 3 minute rock singles, which in the early 70s um, were largely out of favor. So it wasn't like we were calculating, oh, we want to be successful, we want to get signed to a major label. What else is everybody else doing? Oh, let's do that. I mean, you know, a lot of it were kind of progressive rock groups on the like Santana and yes, Deep Purple. But
Sure.
if you look at I'm just going to say if you look at the top 40 in August 1973 when the Winos album came out, the top 10, there was one rock and roll song, which was Brother Louie by Stories. I mean, some of the other songs were Bad Bad Leroy Brown by Jim Croce, um, Get Down, Gilbert O'Sullivan, Helen Reddy, Delta Dawn, The Morning After, Maureen McGovern, Diana Ross, Touch Me in the Morning.
Right.
You know, we were really, you know, it wasn't our music and what we loved to play, it was out of favor. So, but it was, but this is what we wanted to do. So that kind of characterized, what we played live and the originals that we recorded.
When you talk about the self-recording, and you said you're kind of preceding or predating the DIY movement that kind of came a little bit later on in that decade. When you look at that now, especially music today where self-recording is as simple as a laptop. Back then you're limited to the number of tracks, you're limited to the number of machines you can have. How did you acclimate yourself to the limitations of that technology back then?
Well, it was kind of like what was offered. So the first single we did, Nose Job, Backed with the Big War, that was done in the Matey living room, and we got a pretty good sound out of it. It was really well balanced, but it was, as I mentioned, two tracks, one instrumental, and then the vocals, and then we mixed it. The second one was an 8-track studio, and basically then and subsequently as a band we played live. I did a rough vocals so that the musicians could know what was coming up and know the parts, and then afterwards I did the final vocal. We overdubbed background vocals and maybe guitars, some additional guitars. um, so that's kind of how the recording was done. But yeah, as you mentioned about more modern recording, band playing together seems to me how it should be done.
Sure.
And obviously these days you can, one person can play all the parts and just kind of layer it all together. So um, for us, it was, I think playing it wasn't just proficiency or how good we could make it, but it was also the feel, what felt right, even if there might have been some, mistakes. And that's kind of, how we did it. And I think that contrasts to how recording is done today.
You've mentioned Richard Foos already about Rhino Records, yeah, as it starts off as a store and you eventually become manager. When the two of you start having these conversations about what else you can do and distributing and recording and releasing your own music. What was his reaction to it? Was he on board with it right away? Because I mean, it hadn't been done, in very many places, if at all. What was her initial reaction to that?
No, he was totally on board with it. I mean, Richard always liked and embraced, new ideas. By the way, part of this is, when you're running retail or a retail business, I'm not going to say it's rote, but you have a certain framework, and it's not necessarily creative. Although Richard tried to be creative within the context by putting up, goofy signs and contests. So this kind of related to that. So a lot of what inspired Richard and what he liked were practical jokes. And by the way, later on at Rhino, we actually did practical jokes. Sometimes they backfired and they became successful. But a lot of it was, the humor and the sense of humor, and we were really creative that way. So, by the way, let me just give you one example, just because it's relevant about a practical joke that backfired.
Okay.
Um, we had a particular at a certain point, there were a couple radio shows that over the weekends, the DJs, the hosts would put together Louie Louie-a-thons, where there were so many cover versions of Louie Louie. They played one after another. They could do it like over a whole weekend. And Richard really liked that. And he thought, why don't we put out an album of Best of Louie Louie? Now, best of albums were usually one artist, their hits, and maybe some better album tracks. But nobody had put out an album of 9 versions of the same song. I mean, you have to be nuts to do that. But we had a particularly good year, and we thought, that was a practical joke. 9 versions of Louie Louie. We had the Kingsmen. Um, uh, we got Richard Berry, the original version. We had the Kinks. 9 versions,
Right.
and we thought, okay, well, if we lose money on it, it's okay. We're having a good year, and maybe if we get lucky, we'll sell around 3,000. We'll break even, maybe. So after 2 or 3 years, we looked at the sales, they were over 100,000. So that's an idea, or that was a concept of, like a practical joke that,
Definitely paid off.
that worked against us. By the way, a lot of these stories are in a couple books, the Rhino Records story, and one that came out about a year and a half ago, Time Has Come Today, my rock and roll diaries, which are obviously in diary form. So anybody who's interested and wants to know behind the scenes or some of these stories, they're in those books.
One of the first releases that Rhino had was with Wildman Fisher. This is 1975. Go to Rhino Records. For those who may not be familiar with Wildman Fisher, how would you describe what he was all about?
Sure. Well, Wildman Fisher was a street singer in Los Angeles, and on the Sunset Strip, he would go up to people and go, "Excuse me, would you like to hear a new kind of song for a dime?" And if they paid him a dime, then he would sing a song like "Merry Go, Merry Go, Merry Go Round, boop boop boop," and he was really well known. And in fact, years later, 25 years ago, Eric Clapton came into town for the Grammys, and he was talking to the president of Warner Brothers Records, and he goes, "Whatever happened to Wildman Fisher?" So he made an impression. He made an impression on Frank Zappa, who recorded a double album on him, An Evening with Wildman Fisher, which he put out on his own label. So when we had the store, the three of us who worked there, we had his album. So when he came in, he felt accepted because we knew who he was. And sometimes it wasn't that pleasant because on at least 2 occasions, he came in shortly after we opened and didn't leave until we closed up. So it wasn't necessarily a good time having Wildman Fisher in all day. But anyway, in appreciation, he came up with a song, "Go to Rhino Records on Westwood Boulevard. They have nice people there. They'll show you where the records are." Where are the records? They're all over the place. So I called Jeff Gold and I told him, come on down, bring your cassette machine. We recorded them in the back room of the store. We pressed it as the first record and we gave it away as a gift to our customers. I don't know how many of them, looked upon it as being a gift. But months later, we learned that John Peel, who was a popular DJ on the BBC in London, he played it, and his year-end top 50 listener requests for 1975, number 48 was Wildman Fisher, go to Rhino Records. So basically, we pressed up records subsequently to actually, we were able to sell them in part because of that and because of other things in the US. So that kind of started us as far as actually, selling records.
One of the brilliant things that Rhino Records did was focus on reissues and particularly releasing material that had either gone out of print or material that had never been released. I mean, you were producing stuff that might never have seen the light of day, and I imagine that it had to be kind of like almost like a treasure hunt, looking for things that may be out there lurking in the shadows somewhere. How difficult was it to find some of that stuff, or even to get some of that back catalog stuff licensed?
Well, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, with the big selling albums, Michael Jackson, Fleetwood Mac, the major labels were thinking multiple millions. They didn't care about to sell 5,000. So we were really surprised that a lot of artists that we loved growing up with, there weren't any best of albums like the Spencer Davis Group, for instance, or the Turtles. And in some cases, we were able to license these from, whoever owned them. In other cases, some labels looked at us like Rhino. Who's this Rhino? Why are we licensing to them? And sometimes, it may be like it took 2 or 3 years before they gave us permission. The interesting thing about us was the music was the most important thing. So in some cases, where a label might have had some of this available, the attitude was, how can we wring out a few extra dollars from these old hits? And for us, it was different. It was this music was important to us growing up. How could we make it sound really good? And in some cases, maybe better than the original record that came out. Let's track down rare photos. Let's have insightful liner notes. So we were really the first people to kind of do this, and it really worked well for our business. To a number of years later, some of the major labels would, looked at to see what we were doing, and they go, "Oh, look, let's copy Rhino." So they started their own little divisions. So in one sense, while there was more competition to us later on, music fans benefited because they were getting better records than they would have 10 or 15 years earlier.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I always appreciate about when Rhino was at its peak is like you would find things that would come out, these great collections that were like expanded from what you had maybe seen years ago. Like one of the ones that I remember is when the Nuggets box set had come out, and there were a couple of other reissues after that, and you guys were a part of that. I mean, the Nuggets, the initial Nuggets collection was like a really important record, just reintroducing the world to these really important garage rock bands of the 60s.
It's interesting you mention that because, in a sense, Mogan David and his Winos were kind of like the next step of that, even though we were playing in the early 70s, a lot of our repertoire was more in line with American garage bands of the 1960s. So yeah, so I was a big fan of Nuggets, and in fact, prior to us putting out the box set, the 4 CD box set, I had actually overseen on vinyl 9 volumes. So those original 9 volumes of the Rhino Nugget series have a lot more songs from that period than the 4 CDs do. So if anybody is really into it, they can track those down and see. But I mean, in putting it together, I compiled some, other people compiled some others. But there was, I love hearing new songs that really make an impact, and ideally, just because a record wasn't a hit doesn't mean that it's not a good record. I mean,
Right.
how a record gets airplayed or play or used to get airplay, whether Pale entered into it or not. But I mean, there was a record, I'll give you an example, when putting together that original vinyl series, You're My Baby by the Vassals. on Kama Sutra. I mean, I love that record. You're my baby and don't you forget it. Sounds like a top 10 record to me,
Right.
totally unfamiliar. Or I think out of San Jose, I think the Roadrunners. Tell her you love her, tell her you care. I mean, really good records.
Yeah.
And, you know, good music is timeless. You just kind of have to hear it. Let me give you a great example. We made a deal with Dick Dale for his catalog. Of course, Dick Dale was known as King of the Surf Guitar. He
Sure.
was very big in the LA area as a primarily as an instrumentalist. Um, so at a certain point, Quentin Tarantino was putting together the music to Pulp Fiction. I got a call from his music supervisor who wanted to license Mr. Lou over the opening credits. So here's my point. When people saw Pulp Fiction and they heard this great record, over the opening credits, most people, they didn't know who Dick Dale was. They didn't know that it was recorded in 1962.
Right.
They just knew that they liked it. They bought the soundtrack. They ultimately figured out, oh, I like this. They bought Dick Dale's greatest hits. They didn't make a distinction of, oh, this song is 20 years old.
They just thought it was a
They
great
just
song.
reacted to hearing. So again,
Yeah.
good music is timeless when you hear it, when you're presented with it. And that's what I love about, all of this, including, things I was never involved in, like um, the zombies being
Mm.
used in, TV shows, or you hear the creation, this English obscure English band from the 1960s that Wes Anderson put in Rushmore. It's been used in two national US commercials. Like, what? That makes no sense. But again, you hear, and you could just determine if you like it or not. And that's the ethos for me. Rhino, or subsequently with Rhino, or even this the Moog David and His Winos album is people have to hear it and they could make a determination whether they like it or not.
During the prime of Rhino, what would you say would have been like your biggest acquisition, your the biggest get of that part of your career?
Well, for me, by far the Monkees. I was a big Monkees fan growing up. I interviewed them when I was a journalist, and initially we were licensors of the original albums. We recharted on Billboard when they had their revival in 1986 with 7 albums, which I think
Mm.
the only other artist that had done that before was Pink Floyd, maybe Led Zeppelin. And then we did a new album with them in 1987, Pool It. And then we were in a position when the original owners wanted to sell the catalog. We were in a position we were able to buy it. So at Rhino, we were able to do a lot of audio box sets with, rare material, unreleased material. And I kind of oversaw a lot of that. We did initially the video box set of all the shows, the TV shows on VHS. We had a nice box set. It looked like a TV set. We did a documentary with the Disney Channel. We did some other things. I did the biopic on VH1 in 2000, Daydream Believers.
Sure.
So the idea was, as fans and as loving this music and loving the TV show, we were able to not only present this in a really pristine form, but we were able to enhance it with with extras.
In a case like the Monkees, where the large bulk of their hits and their songs were written by other songwriters, did that make it more complicated to license all that stuff?
No, I mean, by the way, especially once we became owners of the catalog. So what that meant was we own the masters,
Right.
and we own the TV shows, not for TV syndication, but for video, for instance. The publishing, the way it works is that after something has been published, then you take what's called a mechanical license. You don't really need to get prior approval, and obviously, we made sure everybody was paid. So yeah, that's how that worked.
You mentioned earlier, or a couple times, about your journalism career. Like you said, you started writing for the Daily Bruin when you were at UCLA. You also started writing for Rolling Stone for a period of time and some other publications too. You were granted a lot of access to some pretty big names at the time, and kind of at a pivotal time in rock history. I mean, obviously, Rolling Stone has got a little bit of cachet, or at least certainly did back then. How did you get access to so many people? Was it difficult, or was it pretty simple based upon the time we're talking about?
Well, I'm going to answer that in a moment, but I need to give you a little anecdote of the first interview I did, which is in My Time Has Come Today, my diary, my book that's out. So we got a call at the Daily Bruin office. Bee Gees were in town. I want to interview the Bee Gees and or Morris Gibb of the Bee Gees, and I was a big Bee Gees fan. And yes, so I interviewed him, and he was a really charming guy. I was really enjoying it. I asked about certain aspects. I was a fan of Odessa, their double album, which I thought was a really good album.
Yeah.
And so the interview was going swimmingly. And then towards the end, Morris goes, "Oh, I'm really happy that Something by the Beatles was a big hit because, well, I played lead guitar on it, and I'm really happy that Abbey Road is a big hit because I played bass on." He mentioned Polythene Pam and Mean Mr. Mustard. Okay, this is my first interview, and I'm thinking to myself, why would George Harrison have somebody else play lead guitar on a song he wrote? Why would Paul McCartney, like the best bass player, why would he have? And now I was too, naive, and I wasn't going to challenge him on it. So I left it out of my article. By the way, many years later, in Lulu's book, Lulu was married to Morris. She goes, "I don't know why he, makes up these stories, and makes it's like a lot of times he can't remember what's real and what isn't." But I mean, so that was my original uh, interview. So I've got like stories like that in my books. But the point I want to make is, you have to think. I was much more interested in interviewing people whose music I liked or from bands from the 60s. So Rod Argent was coming in to town with Chris White. They were promoting their new band, Argent.
Yep.
Big Monkeys fan. Let me interview them. Manfred Mann was coming into town. Manfred Mann and Mike Hug, their new band, Manfred Mann Chapter 3. Big Manfred Mann fan. Let me interview them. So what's interesting is I was more oriented, who do I want to talk to whose music I liked, rather than how sellable they might be. So if you look at it, the bigger names, I mean, I might have liked some of their records, but I wasn't interested in talking to um, uh, the Allman Brothers, or I wasn't interested in talking to Santana, or I
Right.
wasn't interested in talking to, the members of Deep Purple. So, when you ask that question about access, well, the artists that, were selling much better, that were in demand, I wasn't asking to speak to those people. I was kind of, down on this smaller level of people who were coming into town, who weren't at that level. So I'm not going to say everybody I requested I was able to be granted an interview on, but I was pretty successful.
You some of the bands I know that you've talked to, and I've heard that you tell stories about, like Black Sabbath, for example, about that experience, and that you wound up talking to Ozzy, and it was a perfectly gentlemanly type of conversation with a guy.
Yeah, so that was one thing where a call came into the Daily Bruin office, um, and they were in town. They were recording Black Sabbath 4. Okay, they were staying in an area called Bel Air. They were renting a house by John DuPont, who was an heir to the DuPont chemical fortune. And I don't know if you remember this, but Steve Carell starred in a movie about
Yeah.
10 years ago about this guy, John DuPont, who was a wrestling fan and who actually promoted wrestlers and stuff, and then ultimately he killed one of them. Anyway, they were renting his house.
Hmm.
Anyway, I interviewed Ozzy there around the pool house, and I really liked him. He was a really engaging guy and a good sense of humor. And, there was some things that were unexpected, like I didn't realize he was a big Beatles fan. You think about how serious the music is and
He was a huge
the
Beatles fan.
tone, and you wouldn't think like, Ozzy had cutouts of the Beatles pasted on, on his in his bedroom door, and he would like he like dreamed that his sister would marry Paul McCartney, that type of stuff. Anyway, he liked me. He said, "Oh yeah, we're recording, later this evening at the record plant. Come on by." And I went to the record plant. They were recording Snowblind. Was that the song?
Yeah.
Is about cocaine. About cocaine. And again, that's account is in my Time Has Come Today book. But yeah, I just really liked him. And, years later when we saw him on, subsequently, decades later, and also on his TV show, obviously he wasn't the same guy, but the fluidity of his speech back when I interviewed him in this is June 1972. It's too bad that people really didn't get to experience him,
Yeah.
the way I had.
I also heard you talk about Badfinger,
Yes,
and it's a
yes.
really interesting. I mean, that the whole story behind that band is really interesting. But you were kind of catching them at a time where things were starting to get really complicated and not going particularly great for those guys. Tell me a little bit about those conversations.
Exactly. So we got a call into the Daily Bruin office. Ben Fong Torres, who was one of the editors at Rolling Stone, was looking for somebody to interview Badfinger, who were coming to Los Angeles. So they were my first assignment for Rolling Stone. So I saw them play in Pasadena, and I interviewed them in Hollywood at the Continental Hyatt House. They weren't really scintillating on an interview level, but I really liked them. They were just kind of nice guys, and they were around my age. And then seeing them the following year and interviewing them the following year, we became friendly. I wouldn't say friends. We became friendly. I went to London the first time in in the summer of 1972. They invited me to come to their house. We were watching the Olympics a little bit, and then Tommy he bought a used Porsche because Harry Nilsson had a hit with Without You that he wrote. And I remember it was a two-seater. Tommy drove, I was in the passenger seat, and Joey was scrunched up behind. It wasn't even an area. And we went to Apple Records. It was on a Saturday, so Apple was closed, but we went into the basement in the studio area where they were rehearsing. Pete Ham came a little bit later. Um, he was dressed in a white suit because he'd been to a wedding. Um, anyway, I just really liked those guys. I really empathize with their plight, the managerial problems they had. I remember thinking to myself, God, if I could manage them, I would be, really honest with them, and they would get paid. But I was just like 22 years old, didn't know anything, so
Right.
that wasn't gonna, that was really well beyond me. But and then subsequent to that, I ran into Tommy at Me Dem, and he invited me to his house. I didn't visit him, but I mean, I always had like a really special place in my heart for those guys. Subsequently, I spoke to Joey, when I was at Rhino, but I love their music. But when I hear their music, as much as I like it, there's a certain sadness that comes with it because two of them died by suicide, and I just really bothers me to this day.
Yeah, I mean, that they're the story behind those guys, and what they face is like this tremendously tragic story of a band that had so much potential and wrote great hits and had the help of the Beatles for a period of time, and then things just seemed to really de-escalate very very quickly. It's a horrible horrible story.
Uh, right,
maybe one
but
of the worst stories of music.
so at Rhino, at a certain point, I sent a letter to Apple to Neil Aspinall, who was the head of. I offered for the U.S. rights to the Apple catalog, not counting the Beatles. I offered $500,000. I
Mm,
didn't even get the courtesy of a reply,
really?
but I, wanted to reissue the Badfinger catalog. But not being able to do that, I put out a best of volume two of the Warner Brothers period. By the way, that included the four best songs for their third album, which at the time, was had not been released uh, in the U.S. So when you were talking before about, enhancing things and tracking down rare material or adding things, so I was really happy to make those songs available. But the odd thing, whether I mean, it was a serious record, but the audacity of putting out a best of volume two before there was even a best of volume one. Like who would ever do that? Well, we did it because we wanted to get the music out there.
One of the people that I did want to ask you about, because this is someone who, unfortunately, I don't think it's talked enough about. You had a good friendship with Arthur Lee from Love, and Forever
Yes.
Change is one of the one of the great albums of all time. And I've heard him described a number of times as a true genius. And what can you tell me about Arthur Lee and what made him so unique and so special?
Okay, both Richard and myself were big fans of Love, who were very big in Los Angeles. But you have to think Arthur didn't want to play outside of California because he didn't want to be too far away from his drug connections. And also, to some extent, he thought like he didn't really want to play for people who didn't know who he was. He didn't want, that kind of to take a chance on that reaction. So they were, again, much bigger in LA than they were in other places. So the Best of Love was Rhino's first best of a rock compilation. I wanted to do a really good job on that. I tracked down a rare photo for the cover. I interviewed Jack Holzman, who had been the founder of Elektra Records. I interviewed Bruce Botnick, who engineered and produced some of Love. And then I'm on the phone with Arthur, and one of those songs I asked him about, there's a song called Sign DC, which is a never single, is a great record about, somebody having experiencing a heroin problem,
Hmm.
maybe overdosing. I pierce my skin once again, Lord. No one cares about me. It's a great record. And I asked him about Sign DC, Love's original drummer, Don Conca, who had drug problems, but ultimately didn't die back then. Arthur go, oh, it's about Washington, D.C. It's about Washington, D.C. And I'm thinking, here we want to put together a great, album, and he's jiving me. So that was like the inauspicious
Right.
debut or interaction. But I was a fan of Arthur's. I worked with him. I arranged to have him put out a solo album on Rhino. I paid him money. He trusted me. Not that everything was smooth, but he did refer to me as the most honest man in the music business. So that was gratifying. And
That's like a needle in a haystack, Harold.
yeah,
It's
well,
hard to find those
and
kinds of people.
towards the end, while I was at Rhino, we put out a really great double album, an anthology. So
Yeah.
anybody's interested, who can track that down. That's has a lot of really good material on it.
Towards the end of your time with Rhino, I know there were a lot of changes going on in music, and I know there's a lot of consolidation in the industry, and it is a very different world today than it once was. What's your thoughts about where the music industry is right now?
Well, the way I would equate it is that when I was at Rhino, we tried to enhance the music listening experience, whether on an album or whether it be a box set, with, photos or, insightful liner notes, in some cases, making it sound better than when it originally came out. So it was a whole experience. The idea is, you'd sit in front of your stereo, you'd look at the packaging, you'd look at, oh, who are the songwriters on this. It enhanced the experience compared to, in the era of streaming. Sure, you can get the music, and the music in some ways is more accessible than it ever has before, but you really don't get, those additional elements that would, enhance the experience and add to it. So, by the way, I'm not saying that certain labels, for instance, Rhino, that they're not still putting out good packages. I'm just saying, the overall, the consciousness is different, and I think it's, to the detriment of the musical experience.
There's always impressed when I see an artist put out something where there's a lot of care given to like the physical media. There's a lot of pressing of vinyl. There's the multicolor pressing of vinyl. It shows a little bit of a little bit of care. But I, like you say, I mean, some of the best experiences I ever had buying records that had posters inside. You could read the lyrics. You could kind of follow along the who was involved in this record. No, that guy was on that record too. And it's like there's something lost in all of that. Music discovery has become very different, and not as much satisfaction comes out of it today.
Right. Well, I mean, on occasion, I still buy new albums or, box set. I think about a year ago, there was a very expensive Bonzo Dog Band audio and video box set. I bought that. It's an excellent box set. Other things have come out here and there. So, I mean, I'm more attuned to that. I'm not saying that I don't listen on an pod or anything, or my phone, I should say. But it's just my preference is to be sitting
Yeah.
in front of my stereo.
The record again coming out March 6th. There are a lot of things to look in this package. Tell me a little bit about the packaging of this.
Okay, so the original album that came out, it was um, inspired by the Who's live album, Live It Leads, with the inserts in it. It had a number of
Right.
inserts. So the original album had the inserts, and we kind of translated that on this, not inserts, but as it relates to the visuals. So the idea is to have a lot of fun with it and to make fun of ourselves. So we have Paul Rappaport, the lead guitarist. We have his failed music test from UCLA. We have a couple wacky fan letters that we received. So in addition to photos and what people would expect to see, it has these extra bonuses. So the first record we talked about earlier, A Nose Job, here's the invoice from Rainbow Records, and you get to see how many did they press, what did it cost back then.
Wow.
And then I wrote new liner notes, in some cases explain, the history behind it, the songs, and other little anecdotes. Let me give you like one quick story. So as a journalist, I interviewed Peter Noon and was a big Herman's Hermits fan. He moved to LA. We became friendly. We're still friends to this day. I thought, oh, my pal Peter hasn't had a hit in 2 years. So I need to write him one. So there was a Herman's Hermits song that was not a hit, although it sounded like a top 10 record to me, called Here Comes the Star. The idea was he's the idol of all the world, but he'd throw it all away if he could find a girl. So I liked that a lot. So I thought I'm going to write a sequel to this, and it was called All the Wrong Girls Like Me. And I wrote it, I demoed it, I gave it to him. He didn't like it. I was really crushed. I thought, like, this is the best song that Mark Levitin and I had written. So, what do we do with it? It was too good not to record. So I put together a number of people from the store, including Richard on bass, and we recorded All the Wrong Girls Like Me and a B-side. So stories like that, behind the music, that's in the liner notes to again, provide a context for some of these songs.
Harold, your career is absolutely amazing. The books have been great too, and I'm looking forward to your Savage Young Winos. Great to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Harold. Have a great night. The album from Harold Bronson and Mogan David and His Winos is called Savage Young Whinos. It'll be released by Liberation Hall Records on March 6th. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support, but most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.